Around about 5 weeks ago, our coffee team was gathered around our cupping table. The samples in front of us had landed only kind of days before, and we'd collectively kind of held our breath up until that moment. The little emerald green packets scattered around the table represented the first of the fly crop harvest. Now, we owned the mill that this coffee had been processed in. Heck, we even owned the land the mill was built on. And as the slurps went off around the table, they were followed by a pause. And we started to kind of meet each other's eyes, and you could almost hear this collective mental crap. And that's because, the coffee just wasn't up to scratch. Yes, it was good specialty grade coffee, but we had some really high hopes for it, and it just didn't have the pop that we were looking for. On top of that, this harvest was looking to be one of the most expensive seasons for us yet, and would actually land in Australia as one of the most costly coffees in our entire lineup. It was definitely going to be a challenging few months ahead. Now, vertical integration sounds very mature, doesn't it? Very organised, very strategic. But when Matt first asked me to get up here and talk about vertical integration in relation to long-term investment strategies, as per our work at Origin, I was kind of like, what? And that's because in some ways, it almost feels like we fell into owning a mill in North Sumatra. Like it was kind of by accident. But as I've reflected and kind of looked back on the project that's now been running for a few years, I realized that we'd actually intuitively cultivated an environment which allowed this opportunity to emerge. And in many ways, I think this is the specialty coffee environment that we've all collectively nurtured. And it's now bearing some really interesting and kind of exciting new opportunities, just like some of the ones that Nick talked about. So I've got a little bit of a messy story to tell you. It's the one that's kind of leading up to this less than inspiring cupping table. We started it off with a head full of dreams. We've made a lot of mistakes, got our hands really dirty, helped bring some really delicious coffees to life. And we've made a really big stack of relationships that were complex, vibrant, and at times challenging. But I think the reason that this story is kind of important is because nestled within it, there's some ideas that might help other people in this kind of changing and evolving landscape that we face with specialty coffee. So this story starts 16 years ago. Cast your minds back, if you will, to the mysterious depths of the year 2000. Dean, the soon-to-be founder of Five Senses, was working as a school principal in Papua New Guinea amongst coffee-growing community there. And he got bitten hard by the coffee bug. Now, with his stint as a teacher coming to a close, he took this newfound passion, moved back to his hometown of Perth in Australia, and promptly started importing and roasting the coffee from the communities that he'd been living amongst. Now, coffee at that point in Perth, which is the most isolated capital city in the world, was in a pretty bad way. So you can imagine introducing freshly roasted direct trade coffee in 2000. It was pretty revolutionary, right? And we strongly built some really strong wholesale-only routes there. Now, over the years, we continued to focus on quality. And around 2004, we decided we'd try and collect all of the coffees. So we promptly went from a French medium and light roast Papua New Guinea to well over 40 origins. And I still fondly remember this kind of Cuban coffee we had a few sacks of, and it hung around for years, and we'd kind of roll it out on the special occasions. But over the years, we moved into around 2006, and we started focusing on green freshness and seasonality. And eventually we decided that we just needed to get closer to the source. So we packed our bags and headed off to visit some of the coffee farms in Central America. Now, this part of the story, I reckon, sounds pretty familiar to many of you. And I think that's because, in many ways, this is the same path that lots of other specialty coffee roasters have trodden over the years. But the reason that it's important is because behind all of these journeys, all of our journeys, are our culture of our business and our organisation. And I think our ability to meet the changing needs of the specialty coffee industry and the success in that is really going to be underpinned by these cultures, which provides us a mindset and a framework on which we make decisions. So there's not much close to Australia, right? Obviously it was a long trip getting here, but luckily Sumatra is a little bit of an exception. It saves too much human origami for me as I kind of fly on those long haul flights. And in around 2008, we started visiting the region much more frequently and immersing ourselves in the supply chain there. And I don't know how much all of you have drunk kind of Sumatran coffees, but there's some really interesting and kind of unique coffees to be found there. But they're also incredibly inconsistent, or certainly have been in the past. I remember one particular trip to Takinon up in Aceh, where it was kind of one of those moments where it felt like the clouds parted, the sun shone down on the cup in front of me, and I was kind of like, what is that? And it was a wet-hulled, 2,000 metres above sea level, Maragahipe. It was incredible. It was almost like liquid chocolate and orange in the cup. But I've never been able to find it again. But then, after years of searching, we came across two relationships that would send us down a completely unexpected path. The first of these is Leo and Lisa. These guys we met on a sourcing trip in North Sumatra in around 2013. They'd been immersed in the supply chain of the Simalungun region within North Sumatra, and they'd helped set up and were now operating a mill based there. We immediately kind of clicked it off, hit it off there with a kind of a joint passion for seeing the realization of the specialty coffee within the region. But the next relationship that we started off with was that of Talenta. Now, Talenta are a local credit cooperative there. These are the Talenta crew. So these guys are a local credit cooperative, and they had around 5,000 smallholder coffee farmers within that Simalungun region. And they were uniquely positioned there because of their collection network, which used commissaries or village-based collectors to buy directly from those farmers. So after all this time of kind of searching, we were super excited. We'd found these two new relationships, and we couldn't wait to get started. We bought our first container of coffee from the mill that Leo was operating. And when it landed in Australia, we were stoked. It was everything that we could have hoped for. It was unique, it was consistent, and it was clean. Right? It was delicious. But then, just before our second container was ready to be shipped out, we hit our first curveball. With coffee prices plunging and the demand for Sumatran coffee waning, the owners of the mill decided that it was time to pull out. And it was heartbreaking. Here we were so close to kind of gaining momentum in sourcing this incredible coffee, and it felt like it was just crumbling, and it was over almost before it began. So we were kind of faced with this real challenge, but we put our heads together in this kind of bit of a desperate situation, and we hatched a bit of a crazy plan. We kind of said to ourselves, what if, just thinking, what if we owned our own mill? And what if we could get Leo and Lisa to actually come on board to operate that mill and convince Talenta to redirect their commissaries' kind of collection network into providing to this mill? Well, that's exactly what we did. So during 2014, we funded the building of our brand new mill, Tiga. It's nestled on the northeast slope of Lake Toba, about 1,500 metres above sea level. And it includes 1,500 square metres of concrete drying patios covered by parabolic shades for taking the Guiling-Bissar wet parchment, drying it down, and then further drying once it's wet hulled. The rest of the facility is made up of processing and storage. There's a cupping lab and some living facilities for the workers. And it was a pretty incredible project. It took us a lot of work. As we got into the project, we kind of went in with some grand plans, right? We were hoping to get better quality out, better consistency, more traceability, and surely it was going to be cheaper. I mean, we'd taken out 3 of the different members of the supply chain there, and we own the mill. We also thought that we had a really unique opportunity to have a greater social impact with the people that we were working with. And so after the completion of building the mill, we actually gifted part ownership to both Leo and Lisa and to the Talenta Cooperative. So translated from Bahasa Indonesian, Tiga Raja means the 3 kings, representing our new relationship there. Our first lot of the Tiga Raja coffee arrived with us in February 2015, landed with us in Australia. We roasted it up, and it was everything we were looking for. It was delicious. You know, a beautiful crisp acidity, almost like a rich cola-like body. And we brewed it up every which way. Single origin espresso, it was used in milk blends, by the cup filter, and it was a huge hit. But things had only just begun. We'd got our first container out, and there was a lot of work to do. So we kind of got back to that, back at the mill, with a bit of a new spring in our step after tasting the results. But you know what they say about best laid plans, right? Well, the more we got into our project, the more we realized that all of those initial dreams were coming up against the hard wall of reality. And we just realized exactly how much risk we were taking on board. We all know how much the weather can affect a coffee crop, right? But I tell you, it really hits home when you're committed to a very particular geographic region and the supply chain that's embedded there. We had a really poor rainfall in the main kind of maturing phase of 2014, and it resulted in some low yields. The weather, you could probably think, okay, we should be predicting this, right? We should be thinking about this ahead. But one of the things that came out of completely left field was a massive deforestation burn-off in October of 2015 in Western Sumatra. The haze from this out-of-control forest fire blanketed not only the coffee farms during critical cherry maturation, but pretty much all of Indonesia and spread out into neighbouring Singapore. It was pretty horrific. At the same time, we'd been attempting to bypass the local parchment market. We wanted to set up a fair price there that would reward a pursuit of quality and also reduce some of the volatility that coffee farmers normally found interacting with the market. So, great idea in theory, incredibly hard in reality. As you can imagine, changing people's habits, economic habits of just selling to the highest bidder that had happened over years was really difficult. It was all good when the yields were high and, the market was sitting normally. But when you had this convergence of, poor yields from the weather and this kind of burn-off, the skyrocketing prices meant that we actually just had to spend a whole stack more just to secure the coffee that we needed. So that relationship was a little challenging. Despite all those kind of challenges converging around this second harvest of our coffee, it kind of threw things into disarray, but we'd already committed to the project, right? We'd committed to better pricing at the farm gate, returns for the Tiga Raja mill, and we were really committed in that. So it was definitely challenging to navigate all of those aspects. Despite that, though, we have had some really great successes, and this investment up the supply chain has really won some great results. The traceability has been key to that. Without knowledge of the supply chain that we had previously, there was almost a tacit approval of mediocre quality, but we're now able to pinpoint the key impactors on that quality. And we're also able to get a much better resolution on the coffees and the labelling behind them than the more generic kind of Mandaling or Lintong kind of labels that are more common. This image up here is also a really great signifier of some other opportunities we've been able to realise that have brought an even greater celebration of the region's coffees. So last year, we hosted a open cupping. We put it on across all of Australia and even into Singapore. And on the table, we put 7 different samples that represented small village groups from within that greater Simalungun region that we'd separated. We had enthusiasts, baristas, we had other coffee roasters come along. They cupped the coffee blind and voted on their favourite lot. The winning lot, Naga Sarabu, is going to launch as the People's Choice coffee in the next few weeks. So it was a pretty incredible kind of project that we had going. Another really great example is the Limaputri project, or Five Daughters, which was a natural, kind of an experimental natural process coffee. It was a young coffee growing family with 5 daughters who, were just getting started, and this was a really delicious coffee though. It was, all sparkling strawberries and tropical guava, created some really incredible flavors in the cup. And in lots of ways, this was like the ultimate celebration for us of our ability to bring new coffees to life because of our involvement on the ground. Now, in a little bit of a heartbreaking turn of events, something got lost in translation earlier this year, and instead of a staggered rejuvenation pruning, they kind of cut back the whole farm. So another little setback, not much of the harvest to go around this year, but never fear, we're committed to kind of seeing that project come to life again. Now, the Tiga project has kind of seen, obviously, investments from ourselves, but it almost seems to be acting as a bit of a magnet for others who are also interested in kind of what the supply chain could look like and learning a little bit more. So there's definitely a lot of projects in the pipeline. We've just recently commissioned a small colour sorting machine in there, which we're hoping is going to bump up quality while at the same time pushing down costs a little bit. The Talenta Cooperative is looking to fund some nurseries and has already put some organic composting stations into play. Tiga has hired an agronomist to help with some farmer training programs. And we were actually pretty excited to hear that French agricultural research group, CIRAD, is doing a study in the region, and we're hoping it's going to kind of flow through to some funding for coffee berry borer traps and organic pesticides. And to top it all off, the project has attracted a really extensive theory of change study being conducted by really experienced researchers Tony Marsh and Jeff Nielsen. And they approached us to try and take all of our crazy dreams and kind of aspirations and actually quantify them, test them. What impact are we actually having on the smallholder farmers within the region? Is this all talk or what is the actual result? And, I think that the outcome of the report is going to be really interesting in kind of mapping what these different supply chain models can look like and what kind of impact they can really have. So definitely some really great projects there. I think maybe after hearing some of my tales here, you may agree with me that vertical integration from roaster to a processor is freaking hard, okay? Much harder than the more traditional or more commonly trod roaster to retailer front. But I think that it has been an incredible educator for us. We're facing this changing kind of landscape with specialty coffee, and we desperately need knowledge. And I think that there's this ability to kind of get out there and put some of that together by getting our hands dirty with these projects. So we're still kind of knee-deep in this story, guys. I don't know what the end result is going to look like. But I think that within this journey, there's a couple of ideas that might help us focus on addressing the new situations that are cropping up. And I think there's quite a lot of those new situations coming up. Because as kind of Nick explained, we're seeing this meeting of our geeky little specialty coffee subculture meeting mainstream business interests. And we've got a supply chain that's in dire need of future-proofing. So it seems to me an environment that needs a bunch of innovation and needs the new. So there's a few ideas to kind of consider and take away. So yes, our dreams and our romanticism may at times blind us to the harsh realities we face, granted. But I think they also have a passion within them that pushes us into areas which, maybe with some more logical consideration, we might just never venture to. The day-to-day decisions we take, which are underpinned by our culture, are really going to form the foundations for how we progress things. You know how I said early on in the piece that in some ways it kind of felt like maybe we'd stumbled upon owning this mill and it happened by chance? Well, that's not the case. In reality, it came about because of the culture that our business had. We were immersed in the supply chain. We had an open mindset and a bent towards nurturing relationships. So I think that culture moving forward of your businesses and your organisation is going to be incredibly important. Now, this learning for me has definitely a sense of ironic nature to it, and it was a little challenging. But investment in the way that we'd taken it on, in a focus towards quality and social impact, could actually end up turning out situations which pulled apart at each other on those two different aspects. So you invested or committed in people, and sometimes that actually meant that you had to compromise on the quality that you wanted. Or alternatively, you focused on quality above everything else, and that could in turn actually limit the amount of social impact you could have on people. So the tension between these two ideas definitely requires ongoing effort to navigate. But ultimately, I think the biggest takeaway for me has been the importance of people connecting. You want to achieve anything, you need people and you need great relationships. It feels like we've still got a lot of work to do with specialty coffee, and I really believe that the success of that is really going to be laid in great quality relationships. And I think investigating those connections has the potential to unlock some really amazing opportunities. So I guess I'd get you to ask yourself a question, and I'd challenge you. What relationships do you have that you could invest in more with some greater context and greater empathy? Thank you.